A few years ago, the idea of a luxury brand leaving Dubai would have sounded absurd. This was the city that built an indoor ski slope in the middle of a desert, the city where gold vending machines once existed in hotel lobbies. The city that didn't just attract the world's wealthiest people, it was specifically designed to make them feel like they had found their permanent home. So when you start hearing about flagship stores going dark, luxury boutiques quietly clearing out their merchandise, and iconic brands pulling their names from the most famous malls on earth, you have to ask yourself a question that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. Is something breaking in Dubai? If you've been paying attention to what's been happening in cities like this, places that were sold to the world as the new centers of wealth, glamour, and possibility, then stick around and subscribe. We're tracking the cracks that the brochures don't show you. And what's happening right now in Dubai's luxury sector is one of the most revealing stories we've covered. Because this isn't just about stores closing, it's about something larger. It's about what happens when a city builds its entire identity around the idea of endless growth, and then reality starts to push back. Let's talk about that reality. Dubai's luxury economy was never a naturally occurring thing. It didn't grow slowly from the ground up the way that Paris became a fashion capital over centuries, or the way Milan built its reputation through generations of craftsmanship. Dubai's luxury market was engineered. It was constructed at enormous speed, driven by massive government investment, zero personal income tax, and an aggressive strategy to attract the world's richest residents and tourists to a single square mile of artificial coastline. And for a while, the strategy worked almost perfectly. The numbers were extraordinary. By the early 2020s, Dubai had become one of the top 5 cities in the world for luxury retail sales. The Dubai Mall alone was registering over 100 million visitors a year, making it, at least by foot traffic, the most visited retail destination on the planet. Brands that had been cautious about the Middle East for decades were suddenly accelerating their expansion into the emirate. New flagship stores were opening. The waiting lists for the most exclusive products, the handbags, the watches, the private residences were growing longer every year. The mood in the luxury industry about Dubai was close to euphoric. Executives talked about it as a market that had no ceiling, a place where the world's money was pooling, and where consumers weren't just buying products, they were buying identity, status, permanence. Dubai was the city where you came to prove you had made it. But something began to shift. It didn't happen all at once. These things never do. The first signals were subtle enough that most people in the industry dismissed them as temporary noise. A flagship store would cut its staff quietly. A brand would delay the planned expansion of its Dubai footprint. A lease renewal in one of the major malls would go unsigned for a few extra months. Small things, the kind of details that get lost in the headline numbers. The headline numbers, after all, were still telling a positive story. Dubai's population kept growing. Real estate prices kept climbing. The tourism figures the government released were strong. If you looked only at the surface, you could convince yourself that nothing had fundamentally changed. But the surface and the interior of an economy are two different things. And inside the luxury retail sector, the interior was beginning to show real stress. The first major sign that something was wrong came from the occupancy data in the premium retail corridors. The high-fashion floors of the Dubai Mall, the exclusive sections of Mall of the Emirates, the luxury precincts along Sheikh Zayed Road, these were the spaces that had once had zero vacancy, where the competition for a premium address was so fierce that brands would lock in decade-long leases just to secure their position. By 2023, that picture had changed. Vacancy rates in premium luxury corridors were rising for the first time in years. Landlords who had once been able to dictate terms were beginning to negotiate. Some leases were being shortened, some were not being renewed at all. And then the brands themselves started making announcements. Not loudly, not in press releases. The way companies tend to communicate decisions like this is through the quiet language of corporate restructuring. A strategic review of our global retail footprint. A recalibration of our presence in certain markets. A decision to focus on fewer, higher-impact locations. Translated out of corporate language, what these phrases mean is simple. We are leaving. We have done the math. and the math no longer works. The names that started appearing on these lists were not the kind of names you expect to see retreating from anywhere. These were iconic houses, brands with histories spanning a century or more, names that had survived wars, recessions, the collapse of entire economies, names that had been present in Dubai for 20, sometimes 30 years, brands that had invested tens of millions of dollars in flagship stores, in local marketing campaigns, in building the kind of customer relationships that take a generation to develop. When those brands start closing their doors, it tells you something fundamental about the economics of the market they are leaving. It tells you that the cost of operating in that city has grown faster than the revenue those operations can generate. It tells you that the customers who were supposed to be there, the ultra-high net worth residents, the luxury tourists, the global elite, who were meant to make Dubai their permanent home, are either not spending the way they used to, or they are simply not there in the numbers that the projections assumed. Both of those things are happening simultaneously in Dubai right now, and the reasons behind each of them tell you a great deal about the deeper structural problems that the city's economy is beginning to face. Start with the spending. The ultra-luxury consumer has changed significantly since the boom years of Dubai's retail expansion. The generation of buyers who drove the extraordinary growth of the early 2010s Russian oligarchs, Gulf nationals with oil wealth to spend, South Asian business dynasties relocating their fortunes has fragmented. Russian money, which was an enormous driver of Dubai's luxury economy for years, became complicated after 2022 inches waves that affected spending patterns across the entire sector. Gulf national consumers, who represent the most loyal and highest spending segment of the market, have become significantly more sophisticated in their buying behavior. They are increasingly purchasing in London, Paris, Milan, and New York cities, where the experience of buying a luxury product carries cultural and historical weight that Dubai's engineered retail environment simply cannot replicate. And then there is the cost of living question. This is the factor that tends to get underplayed in discussions about Dubai's luxury economy, but it is critical. The assumption behind the city's entire retail strategy was that its residents and tourists would have significant discretionary income available for luxury purchases. That assumption is now under serious pressure. The cost of living in Dubai has risen at a pace that has shocked even long-term residents. Rents have increased by 30, 40, sometimes 50% in certain areas over just 3 years. Service costs, utility bills, school fees, healthcare, the baseline cost of simply existing in the city, has climbed dramatically. When your fixed costs rise that fast, your discretionary spending contracts. Even among the relatively wealthy, the proportion of income available for luxury purchases shrinks when the cost of the essentials expands. This is the quiet crisis that Dubai's tourist office and its real estate marketing materials don't talk about. The city has become extraordinarily expensive to live in, and that expense is starting to change behavior even at income levels that should theoretically be immune to it. Now here is the part that makes this story more serious than a simple economic correction. The brands that are leaving are not being replaced. In previous cycles of retail disruption in Dubai, and there have been a few over the years, a departing brand would typically be replaced within months. The demand for premium addresses in the best malls was so high that landlords never had to worry about gaps. A space would be vacant for a matter of weeks before a new tenant was lined up. Sometimes brands would be waiting years for the chance to take over a specific location. That is no longer the pattern. The spaces being vacated by departing luxury brands are staying empty longer. Some are being converted to different categories, entirely mid-market concepts, food and beverage operators, entertainment concepts. When a luxury corridor starts converting boutique space into restaurants and experience concepts, it is a clear signal that the landlord has accepted a new reality. The luxury tenants who would have paid premium rates for that space are no longer available in sufficient numbers to fill it. This is how the physical landscape of a luxury district begins to change. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in a gradual reconfiguration. A flagship here, a boutique there. The gaps fill in with different kinds of businesses. The overall character of the retail environment shifts. And eventually, The remaining luxury brands notice that they are surrounded by a different kind of neighbor than the one they signed their lease to be adjacent to. That affects their own customer flow, their brand perception, their sales performance, and it creates pressure on the next round of lease decisions. It is a slow unwinding, but it is an unwinding. The specific brands that have departed or significantly scaled back their Dubai operations over the past 2 years represent a cross-section of the global luxury industry that makes the trend impossible to dismiss. You have heritage fashion houses from Europe that were among the first to establish flagship stores in the city. You have watch brands from Switzerland that built entire boutiques around their Dubai presence, investing in custom interiors and dedicated local staff. You have jewelry houses whose names are synonymous with the highest tier of luxury, globally recognized as markers of extreme wealth, whose Dubai operations once generated significant revenue. You have automotive luxury concepts, not cars, but the lifestyle and accessory brands associated with them that have pulled back from their positions in the city's premium retail corridors. And across virtually all of these closures, the language used by the brands is consistent. It speaks of market evolution. It references changing consumer patterns. It talks about optimizing the global retail network. What it never says directly, but what is entirely clear to anyone who reads the financial reports and talks to the retail analysts who cover this market, is that the return on investment in Dubai has declined to the point where the capital can be deployed more effectively elsewhere. When luxury brands say that, they mean it. These are not companies that make emotional decisions about their real estate. They run precise models of revenue per square meter, of customer acquisition costs, of brand impression value per location. When those models come back with unfavorable numbers, the stores close. It is not complicated. The complexity is in understanding why the numbers changed, and whether the forces driving the change are temporary or permanent. The evidence, unfortunately for Dubai's luxury sector, points increasingly toward the structural rather than the cyclical. The factors driving down the economics of luxury retail in the city are not the kind that resolve themselves over a business quarter or two. They are embedded in the fundamental dynamics of the city's cost base, its population composition, its relationship with the global wealthy class, and its increasingly difficult competition from other cities in the region that are building their own luxury retail ecosystems at significantly lower cost and with different strategic advantages. Abu Dhabi is the most obvious competitor within the UAE itself. The capital has been investing heavily in its own luxury retail infrastructure, and it has a number of structural advantages over Dubai. It is quieter, more residential, more focused on a Gulf national clientele rather than the transient tourist and expat population that has always been Dubai's primary market. For brands that are thinking carefully about where to concentrate their resources in the Gulf region, Abu Dhabi is increasingly an attractive alternative or complement to Dubai rather than a distant second choice. Saudi Arabia represents a more dramatic shift in the regional competitive landscape. The Kingdom's Vision 2030 program has included a massive expansion of its luxury retail sector, driven by a young and rapidly growing wealthy domestic population, government investment in cultural and entertainment infrastructure, and deliberate efforts to retain domestic luxury spending that had previously flowed out of the country to Dubai and Europe. As Saudi consumers increasingly find world-class luxury retail in Riyadh and Jeddah in environments designed specifically to serve their preferences and culture, the logic of the trip to Dubai solely for luxury shopping becomes less compelling. This is not a hypothetical future dynamic. It is already happening. The luxury brands that have been opening stores in Saudi Arabia over the past 3 years are, in several cases, the same brands that have been closing or scaling back in Dubai. The capital is moving. The flag is being planted in a different city. For Dubai, this regional competitive pressure represents a fundamental challenge to one of the core assumptions on which its luxury economy was built. The city's strategy was always, in part, to position itself as the luxury capital of the entire broader Middle East and South Asia region, the one place where the wealthy of the Gulf, of Egypt, of Pakistan, of India, of East Africa, Iran would converge to access the full range of global luxury brands and experiences. That positioning was credible for years because the alternatives were genuinely inadequate. Dubai was the only city in the region that had the infrastructure, the connectivity, the regulatory environment, and the sheer variety of brands to support that claim. It no longer has that monopoly. And losing a monopoly, even a partial one, changes the economics of every transaction that was conducted within it. The other dimension of this story, the human dimension, the one that numbers alone cannot capture, is what is happening to the workforce and the community that was built around Dubai's luxury sector over the past 2 decades. This is a world that developed its own culture, its own social networks, its own rituals and routines. The people who built careers in Dubai's luxury retail industry, the store managers, the brand directors, the visual merchandisers, the marketing professionals, the private client advisors who cultivated relationships with the city's most valuable customers, many of them came from around the world specifically to be part of what Dubai was building. They relocated families. They bought properties. They invested in the idea that this was a permanent ecosystem, not a temporary opportunity. When flagship stores close and regional headquarters relocate, these people face a choice that feels very different from a simple career transition. They are not just changing jobs, they are reconsidering the city itself. And many of them, when they run that calculation, are reaching a conclusion that would have seemed unthinkable 5 years ago. They are leaving. This is the detail that sits beneath all the retail data and the lease statistics and the corporate restructuring announcements. The people who had the most deeply committed relationship with Dubai's luxury economy are beginning to question whether that commitment was wise, whether the city that seemed so permanent and so full of possibility has, in fact, turned a corner, whether what is happening now is a temporary adjustment or the beginning of something that restructures the city's economy in ways that cannot be easily reversed. There is no clean answer to that question. No one can tell you with certainty what Dubai looks like in 10 years, or whether the forces currently reshaping its luxury sector will stabilize or accelerate. Cities are resilient. Dubai has demonstrated extraordinary adaptability in the past, and it has resources, financial, political, logistical, that most cities can only imagine. But the pattern of what is happening now is not a pattern that resolves itself simply by waiting. The brands that have closed their doors did not do so because of a bad year. They did so because the structural economics of operating in the city changed in ways that their long-range projections could not absorb. The customers who are spending less in Dubai's luxury stores did not stop spending because of a temporary mood. They are responding to real changes in their cost of living, their alternatives, and their relationship with the city. The competitors who are drawing luxury spending toward other cities in the region are not going to stop investing in their own ecosystems just because Dubai has historically been dominant. The golden era of Dubai luxury retail, the era that was defined by unlimited optimism, by year-on-year growth that seemed to defy the normal laws of market gravity, by brands competing for the privilege of planting their flags in this single city in the desert, that era is over. The closing of these 12 stores is not the cause of its end. It is the evidence that the end has already arrived. What comes next is a story that is still being written. Dubai will not disappear. It will not become irrelevant overnight. It is too large, too well-funded, and too strategically important to the region for any of that. But it will be a different kind of city in the years ahead than it was in the decade that just passed. The brands that remain will operate in a more competitive, more cost-conscious, more cautious market. The ones that have left will not all come back. And the city, that once seemed to have no ceiling, will spend some time, perhaps a long time, figuring out what its real height actually is. That is not a comfortable realization for a place that was built on the premise that limits did not apply to it, but it is the honest one. If you want to understand what is really happening in cities like this, places that were sold to the world as permanent destinations of wealth and ambition, and are now quietly recalculating what they actually are, subscribe. There are more cities on this list than you might think, and we are going to cover every one of them. The world is changing. The map of where money flows and where it stops flowing is being redrawn right now, and we are watching it happen in real time.